Today is a very special episode of the Soapboxx podcast today because this month is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and we have the honor and privilege of talking and bringing this conversation to you. So, with that being said, if you know anybody that is in need of help for a domestic violence issue, please reach out and we will have resources for you as we on the Soapboxx are committed to bringing more light to this issue about prevention and advocacy. So, enjoy the show.
Domestic violence is an alarming problem. On average, 24 people per minute are the victims of rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner in the United States. Over the course of a year, that equals more than 12 million women and men.
For a large number of families, home is not a safe place. Too many young people are exposed to domestic violence in their homes as either victims or witnesses. Domestic violence is connected to other forms of violence such as animal abuse. Up to 70% of domestic violence victims have pets. Abusers threaten, injure, and at times kill pets in order to create an environment of fear within the home.
Although anyone can be a victim of domestic violence, women, and primarily women of color, are disproportionately affected by intimate partner violence. In our communities, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men experience intimate partner violence at some point in their lifetime. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. While many of us live or work with domestic violence throughout the year, October is a time set aside where we invite our community to join with us in allyship. We invite you to join us in supporting survivors, in forming relationships that are healthy in our community, and in finding ways to understand the intersections between domestic violence and other forms of abuse and violence, like cruelty to animals. We call on you to be an ally as we work in this movement to end domestic violence.
Hey, welcome to the Soapboxx podcast. I'm your host, TJ Legacy, and I am joined with the best co-host that any host can ever ask for, and that is my man all the way from NYC, New Jersey, all that good stuff. What's going on, Alan York? How are you?
Oh man, I'm feeling good. Had a pretty productive day thus far. I got my lemon water. And tomorrow's Friday, so it's not too much to complain about, man. TJ, how you feeling?
I'm feeling good. It's been a tough week, but we are making it do what it do. Everybody is out here surviving, trying to drink water, keep the mental health going, and keeping it straight. Lady from the north, what's going on, Jesse? How are you?
I'm doing swell and well, alive, happy to be here, blessed and highly favored. Thank you for asking.
Appreciate you. Well, today we have a very important topic to discuss, and we have the honor of having some really some heavy hitters as far as guests to shed some light on an issue of domestic violence. But first, before we get to that, make sure if you're following and make sure you follow us, Soapboxx Podcast with 2X. That's Soapboxx Podcast with 2X. So without further ado, I want to introduce, first I'm going to introduce this lady is Miss Vel Johnson. She is a communications extraordinaire, publicist, works with nonprofits, corporate America. She is the guru of all of communications. Vel, how are you today? Let me see. Let me unmute yourself. Unmute. There you go. How you
there
doing,
we go.
Yeah,
I'm wonderful. Thank you, TJ. It's so good to see you again. How are you?
Yeah, it's good. It's been a while. Alan, I don't know if you noticed, Vel and I, we met years ago through a mutual friend, Marcel Evans, introduced me to Vel.
The legend,
Yes,
Marcel.
the legend. Yes. And so, Vel, you approached me and said, look, you've watched the show, you know what I do in the community. And you said that, hey, you're having an event for Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and you had some panelists. And so you were gracious enough to say, hey, could we come on your platform and shed some light? And I appreciate that. So thank you for joining us. Are you muted again?
Okay, I did. Can you hear me?
Okay. Don't worry about it. We'll get it.
We'll get there. Thank you for accepting this, allowing us to come on your program. We really appreciate this opportunity. And yes, this is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. The name of your show is You Are Not Alone. And my public relations consultancy, I own the company, but I decided that it was time that we bring a greater emphasis to the situation that is so prevalent, not only for women, but for men as well. So we put together a platform. There's going to be an event taking place October 30th at a downtown Orlando location, where we have 7 experts that are convening to be able to provide, there they are right there, mental health.
This is a professional show, Val. We got you. We got you.
I see. So we're convening to be able to provide, we have a mental health counselor that's going to be there on the platform, along with 6 other experts that shine uniquely on their own. So I'm really excited about this opportunity to be able to unite our community in a real special way. And what we plan to do is provide a safe and a nurturing environment where individuals can feel free to come and share their stories. They can shed tears if they choose to. We want it to be an opportunity of networking. We're going to have lunch. And, wherever there's food, there's always a little bit of fun, right? So we're just really excited about this opportunity. It's a very important issue. Unfortunately, there's only 1 month that's dedicated to recognizing it, but we want to make sure that we take advantage of this month in the most positive way possible and be able to be a great resource to the local community. We are not announcing the address publicly, because we want to make sure that we preserve the privacy of our guests. If you understand, like with the Harbor House and other organizations, we want to make sure that those that have been impacted by domestic violence or sexual assault, bullying, or abuse, those are the major areas that we're going to be focusing on. We want to make sure that if they've been impacted in any way, that they feel safe in knowing that this event is not going to be one that's going to be blasted out to everyone, so it's we're going to even have someone to walk everyone to their cars afterwards to make sure that they're able to. We can't go home with them, but we can make sure that they get to their cars safely.
Now that you mention that, it's actually, really smart and insightful. And I don't think a lot of people understand exactly what that entails, because you would think, oh, you just have a community event. But the fact that you have to take that precaution makes you understand the severity of the situation, that, if you have a victim, that they are still, even though they've been victimized, they are still at risk for more violence. And so you are creating a safe space for these individuals, which should be commended. Speaking of safe space, we have Miss Tanika. How are you, Miss Tanika of Bruised But Not Destroyed? How are you? The founder of Bruised and Not Destroyed. Let me get it right. Make sure you're unmuted.
And Not Destroyed.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. You were muted before.
Okay. Yes, the executive director and founder of Bruised But Not Destroyed.
Yes. So tell us a little bit about Bruised But Not Destroyed, and why you decided to become the founder of this organization. What was your inspiration? I know you are also a survivor as well.
Yes, when I was watching that clip that you were actually showing before the show started, mine started just like they were talking about childhood abuse. Children who either witness it or are victims of abuse in childhood are more susceptible to abuse in adulthood. And that's my story. I didn't watch my parents fighting, but my mother, let's just say, she ruled with an iron fist. And I can't really blame her. It's because that's what was done to her. And parenting doesn't come with the handbook. You do what was done to you. And because I was so used to that abuse, when you love somebody, you beat them. So when I got into adulthood, oh, he loved me. That's why he hit me. He wouldn't do it if he didn't love me. It got into my my marriage, and I ended up coming to Florida. 4 kids with 1 suitcase. I had to flee because I was going to kill him, or he was going to kill me. And that's how I ended up here. When I moved here, I thought I had found my knight in shining armor. He was a juvenile correctional officer working with children, had no record, had no children. And I'm like, okay, got the perfect man. Found out he had molested all 3 of my daughters.
Oh, wow.
And kind of I literally thought I was going to have a mental breakdown. And I wrote a book. And when I published the book, I just started being flooded with phone calls and messages and emails of people just pouring their stories out, telling me all the stuff that they went through, because I was very transparent in my book. And they just started telling me their stories. And I'm like, it's a need for this. My story, though unfortunate, is not an isolated incident.
Yes.
And that's why I founded the nonprofit.
Wow. What is the name of your book for our listeners who are not just listening to us on the streaming service currently on Facebook and YouTube? Appreciate you, Soapboxx Nation, but also overseas. We have an overseas audience in London and Portugal and some other countries that have found our podcast that we haven't advertised, but we're glad that they're here and a part of Soapboxx Nation. So what's the name of your book, the title of your book?
So it is called No More Secrets, The Truth Behind Her Smile. It's actually available on our website. Our website is www.bbndinc.org. That stands for Bruised But Not Destroyed Inc.org. And a portion of the proceeds from the book actually go to help us with our transitional housing. We offer transitional and emergency housing for victims of domestic violence.
Yeah, that is important. We have Mr. Sean Roberts. How you doing, sir? He's in the comment section. Your pain can help someone else. Yes, I was always told that your testimony is not your own. You don't go through things, in vain. And so for you to channel that and to make change and advocate for those who are also victims also should be commended. I do want to bring in, and I've done, some research, probably not as much research as I need to, but as I should have. But I want to introduce Miss Gail Gardner. Miss Gail Gardner, how are you?
I'm wonderful. Can you hear me?
I can hear you a little faint, but we can hear you. We can hear.
Can you hear? Okay.
Yes, there you go. There you go.
There. Raise my voice. Tamika, I'm so honored to meet you.
I'm excited to meet you.
My story, listening to yours, and I'm grateful for being here. Thank you, Belle, for alerting me to this site. I told someone, I said, oh, those are the type of folks I want to talk to. I want to make sure they get this message. So
Yeah,
I'm a baby boomer leaving a legacy.
mm,
And so that's my mission, is to make sure that the next generation knows how to advocate for themselves.
absolutely.
And to put some things in place through the system so that they do not have to go through some of the things I have to go through.
Yes, and we're definitely going to talk about some of the new legislation that's coming down the pipeline for you. But we were off camera and we talked about, you said you were excited about being on the Soapboxx podcast. You said, you're like, you've seen some episodes before. You didn't see Jesse and Alan cut up, not me so much, but you've seen how they act on the podcast. So they're going to behave today.
Well, my son in the New York cap, I'm a baby boomer, but I'm born in Harlem, raised in the South Bronx. So I'm
Hey.
there. Yeah.
A fellow Harlemite.
Yeah, so right away you got my heart, sweetheart. I got you. How old I get, and how many years I've been in Florida. I've been in Florida 42 years, and I still say I'm a New Yorker. So there you go. There you go.
Got
Once a New
She
Yorker,
got
always a New
She got
Yorker.
New York roots too.
Huh?
Once a New Yorker, always a New Yorker.
Always a New Yorker. Now I don't cool down a whole lot. I decided to give my life to the Lord. So some things had to go, some things didn't have to stand anymore. I couldn't do it. Went into the ministry and that was it, But every once in a while I have to take myself back to Forest Projects in the Bronx. So my mentality, and I have to catch myself, real quick.
Absolutely. You talked about Ms. Garner. You talked about leaving a mark. In my research, you had a tagline. You said something in the interview. I watched the interview from News 13 here in Central Florida, and you talked about becoming a survivor to a thriver. What does that actually mean to you? That saying?
That's what Tamika is, and so many others. Is that when you survive, the law enforcement says we're victims, but when we looked at it as survivors, I mean, we were able to live through, and even though we have survived, the whole idea is to keep moving, which she did, and so many others, and myself, until we become thrivers, where we can help someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that discourse is the beginning of healing. So not only was she able to talk about it, but others. I sit in the airport and people just tell me all their business they hadn't told anybody else, And I've been advocating for the last 10 years for other people. And so finally, I found out that my case was still open, but I was a sexually abused child, but I was sexually assaulted in 1988 by who was dubbed the Malibu rapist back then. So I went and didn't know how to advocate for myself. And years went by. And finally walked in the police station looking for my records to write a memoir, so that my one book was my only book, I needed to do something else here for my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren who are adults, some of them now. So that's how I found out my case was still open. And so I've been advocating for others, and now I had an opportunity to advocate for myself. And I said, now, if everybody knew this, they wouldn't have to go 30 years. So I'm dedicated to advocating, at the same time teaching others how to be self-sufficient, working with some, and because of that, legislators and other supporters got together, and so now we have Gale's Law as of July 1st, in which the DNA tracking system is in place, so that you get a barcode if you want it, and you go online and see where your case is, who has it, what stakeholders have it, who's had it too long. And I can't say I did a news a press conference and some other things, that are in the front page and send all of that. But other people were saying, well, why you don't? Because it looks like this one dropped the ball, but nobody's telling on who really dropped the ball. But I know who dropped the ball. But what happens is, what does that do? I'm 74. I'll be 75 next year. I don't want to spend 10 years trying to get money when I can help change the system. And that's the whole thing, to change the system. And there was 26 other women who were found after my case. They went in on the shelves and found other cases behind that, because they knew that right away, put their feet to the fire, somebody's going to have to do some explaining to do. And with that, those 26 kids, 11 of those people have died, of which I plan to honor. Now, the perpetrator's been sitting in jail since 1992, and nobody, I didn't know it, and a few others didn't know it. And so I've been looking over my shoulders, and that's a mental health issue right there. The uncertainty of that, and the PTSD, and all of that, plus being child sexually abused. And me too, Tamika. I have a daughter who suffered through, some things I didn't know until she became an adult, and she's still suffering from that. So with that, that's a lifelong, debilitating condition, and it has to be, healing is the only place, but you have to find that place of healing. And our people, it's like what goes on in this house stays in this house, and that's the curse of it all. And that's because nobody told it. See, if you told somebody, some stuff would have stopped. And somebody saw little Johnny watching porno. Somebody saw little Johnny playing with himself. Somebody was. I have relatives who have children for their first cousins, and somebody knew and then kept it a secret. Like you said, sis. So it's debilitating. But we're hoping that whatever we do, and my generation will take that place. And I'm going to invite all y'all to my birthday party next year. It's going to be a blast. Motown, Philly sound. Oh, yeah.
Okay. We
We're going to get ready.
We're going to Soul Train right on down the line next year in July. Yeah, I said, this is the crew I want to hang with,
Yeah.
I'll pray for you. Send me your prayer request, but we're going to make sure
Got you. Well, I wanted to ask, and because from Tanika, your testimony, your story, and Ms. Gail, your testimony as well, I wanted to just jump right into, advocacy for Black women who are the victims of sexual assault and domestic violence from 1988. What do we need to do as far as a society so that Black women are more so believed in this field? Because there is a disproportionate where they're not, or it's like they're not getting the convictions, they're not getting the resources as much as their white or Latino or Latina counterparts. What is it that what can we do, or people who are listening to advocate more for Black women? Is it the breaking the culture of just keeping everything in house that we've always heard from since we were younger? What do you think, Tanika?
That's actually in my book. When she said that, I was like, whoa, that's a book. I say we need to stop telling children what happens in this house stays in this house, because that's what happens. When I was writing my book, I started speaking to some of my mother's sisters, so some of my aunts, and just the things that I found out, this is a generational thing that has been happening. So my mother's ex-husband molested me. It was her boyfriend at the time. She married him afterwards. My grandmother, all of my aunts were molested by various boyfriends that she had and brothers. Before that, her and her sister, this had been going on from generation to generation to generation. And you just don't say anything. You don't tell anybody outside the house. You just sweep it under the rug, pretend like it didn't happen, because you don't want anybody outside the house to think anything ill of the family. You have to keep up appearances. That's actually where it starts, is we have to change that. What happens in this house shouldn't stay in this house. What are you doing in the house that a child can't say anything? What are you doing?
And that basically what you have is the spirit of shame and guilt. It's a whole attitude about guilt, about shame. Even with domestic violence, you'd be surprised how many professional women are living in a household of domestic violence, but they won't go anywhere because we talk about moving to a shelter. You gotta be kidding. You can't do that. Everybody don't know. And so with the same thing, and when people tell me, well, that's the generation of curse that went from this generation, no, that's because somebody didn't speak up, because you could have stopped it a long time ago. And if anything, the relatives that were doing it, you were told, don't sit on Johnny's lap, or don't do this, don't tell that. And then next thing you know, so and so's pregnant and had a baby. Well, where did this baby come from? Well, you don't know, but it's the first cousin's baby. I mean, it's Bubba's baby. It's unreal. And people have had babies for their fathers. Their natural fathers. I know a couple. It's just too much. So
But
yeah,
even when they do speak up, it's still like,
yeah.
for instance, when I found out that my ex-husband had molested my children, first of all, I'm devastated because I'm like, how can a man I planned on spending the rest of my life with, who knows what I went through with my mom's husband, do the exact same thing to my children? And even what my mom was telling me, well, if you love him, you can make it work. Just make sure he's not around the kids.
Yeah.
So even when you do speak up, you're told these things. My grandmother knew that her children had been molested. They had told her, don't tell anybody, don't say anything. So it's not that people aren't speaking up. Even when they do speak up, a lot of times because of the shame and because the family doesn't want to be looked at or viewed a certain way, again, they sweep it under the rug. What goes on in my house stays in my house.
It wasn't until I told my mother, I'm sorry, it wasn't until the rape, I was 42 years old, that I told my mother about her husband when I was a kid. And that's a lot of that goes on too. It's believing these children. We have to believe them.
And that's the problem, is believing. You choose, a lot of times they know, but you choose not to believe them. You choose to fault the victim. Well, what did you do? Or you must have seduced him. Or you should have been walking around. I know what my mother told me when I told her what her then boyfriend had did before she married him. Yeah. Well, you already got a baby, because I was 16 and I had my daughter when I was 15. Well, it ain't like virgin. What did you do? Was you seducing him? I told you about walking around with them short shorts.
I know.
So that was my fault that he a pervert?
Yeah. And what my daughter, and what it does, you look for that person to protect you. And you end up having an issue with that mother. You and your mom don't necessarily get along. You don't know why, but that's basically it. Is because she was not, you can see it as her not protecting you. In my daughter's case, I kept sending her back to visit my mother and my stepfather without not knowing what was going on. And she was an adult with children before she told me. And so it's prevalent. You'd be surprised at how many have done it. You got young boys today who think it's okay to smack a girl on the behind or to have sex with a girl. Then when daddy and mama would say something, that he done lost his scholarship no matter how good he played on the football team. He's not going anywhere. And it's got a felony now. And if they get the felony off of him, okay, let's say there was the felony's gone, but the college still don't want him.
Yeah. See? Well, whenever I hear about, there was a campaign of believe Black women, and I was just, and you listen to stories and you hear testimonies, as men, and you say, how Black women feel so unprotected. And a lot of it, when you look back and you read, about slave narratives and what happened on the plantation, about how Black women felt unprotected and how, they were molested by massa or molested by other slave men in order to breed, more slaves. And then they were also told back then, don't say nothing. So these are stuff that have been ingrained within our society, in the system of white supremacy, that we continue to perpetuate, right? So when we have, and especially, and today you brought this up as far as like parents just doing what they already know, right? Like you have, island parents, right? Who all they know is like, hey, you talk back, is you get the lash. And so we understand that a lot of these parenting styles, and sometimes we have to unlearn things that we get from our parents, and it's very hard in our culture to do that, right? Yeah. But before we move forward, I want to introduce, we have our other co-host. She's here, news reporter all the way on the hill from Tallahassee, Florida, documentary extraordinaire. Ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't been on her page, where she has a new documentary out there, this is Just Giovanni Hampton. How are you?
Hi, everybody. I am good. I'm happy that I was able to make the show, and I'm glad I caught a couple of minutes of the conversation. And yeah, I mean, I can feel the realness through the podcast, so I appreciate that for sure.
Yes, appreciate you. So I wanted to steer the conversation back a little bit back to the Gales Law. So I saw that they needed to. Is it all law enforcement agencies in the state of Florida? They need to implement a database by 2023. Is that correct?
FDLE is required to have a database. As a matter of fact, they've got some other information that they just got over after we asked for 3 years for it. They're very slow about getting that information together. And now we've been waiting, and ACLU has sued them because they do not have a femicide list of women who have been killed by men in relationships, most of them. But they've been looking for other women while women of color have been going missing for months and years. So now they're having to produce that as well. So yeah, every FDLE and the local are part of that. Florida, the Victims Against Women's Act, Violence Against Women's Act is much a part of trying to get women of color, especially indigenous and Black women and Hispanic women, to pick that ball up again since Joe Biden has been in office and get reauthorized. So everybody's going to have to walk to that beat of that drum.
So what is?
And I've been following your story. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Jay. Go ahead, Jay.
No, yeah, I just wanted to say that I have been following your story. Well, I started at the Florida Channel in 2019.
Yeah.
And I think I've been following it since then. So it's an honor to have you on the podcast.
Thank you.
And everyone else as well.
Thank you.
So where do we go for us? So we have Gales Law. There needs to be implementation of the database from 2023. What is the next step in your advocacy, Ms. Garner, after Gales Law? Because some people, advocates, like you said, you would spend 10 years getting money, but you got a law. Some people would say, "Ooh, okay, it's time for me to kind of kick back and relax." But I don't think that's you. What is the next step for your advocacy that maybe other people who want to be allies can assist?
I will be certified by the state of Florida by the first of the year, by the end of the year, as a certified advocate. I've been operating on my own, too sure to say, but for 10 years, and I've had the backings of Victim Service Center and other providers and legislators because people would come to me when they wouldn't go to mental health. People of color, matter of fact, I'm board certified as a pastoral counselor, and will be going into my PhD program to do research mostly on African Americans, culture and women in regards to violence and it coming from across the water. We believe that it started in the hut. Just finished finding my DNA, and I really believe that a lot of our things start from when even our own kings back then were selling us off. So it's very important that we know what we're doing. And so when I go into this this next step, I will be going with more information. And everybody has a story. I always listen. That's what started this. I would listen and let people talk as long as they could. And they would tell me things that the conversation didn't start about. But then you find out they've been molested, or they've been more than sexually violated. Children, adults who wind up with 2 and 3 marriages. So being able to counsel at that level and be able to go to court, whether it's domestic violence or mostly sexual assault, and cases which I would probably wind up with, and taking them by the hand, walking them through the process, and even after the court date. My perpetrator, they slapped him on. He has a life sentence, and yet they're still going to take him to court for justice. And I believe that's where it should be, even though he has a life sentence. Let him plead. Well, he pleaded. He didn't plead this time. He said that he wants a trial. So I will be marching down to the courthouse, and those other women that are going to, who are filing against him, that they found recently since my case, will be going with them. And I've been asked by the state attorney office to keep myself available as much as possible so that they can meet me and so we can all have a talk. And so those are the type of things I want to do. Talk with groups of women, talk with women, one-on-one. Let's get it out, because my generation is dying with secrets. You know that, Tamika. And you got to hear some things from your aunt. I can tell you that I didn't, and I know there was some things in there because things just don't pop up. So it's very important that we walk through and talking about me with them to the place where they'll start to heal and maybe begin to encourage others to tell their story too. I believe you get that stuff, enough of it, and throw it up on some billboards, or whatever, and watch your back, and make sure or put the rape statistics up there. Yeah. That'll cause some folks, don't want anybody really to know, but it's going to.
I'm sorry. I wanted to ask, because you brought up a good point. Why don't we, as society, start putting domestic violence awareness and sexual assault awareness into the school curriculums, like more, so that we can kind of change the culture of it. Like, I never understood with all the politicians and the legislation why it's not actually ingrained in the culture. Like, there's other advocacy, there's other groups that have rights, that want rights to advocacy that's being taught in schools. But when we talk about domestic violence or sexual assault, this affects everybody. And it doesn't matter what your sexual orientation is. Why isn't that the next phase of trying to change the culture?
There's, if you've been through one abuse, you phenomenally, it's a phenomenon they call it, but it's because of your mentality you wind up in another abuse. Even marrying someone, Tamika, because of the way you felt about yourself. We are with the people we are with because of how we feel about ourselves.
Once you what you have been healed from.
That's right. Once we start changing that. Now, when we get to that, we talk about thriving. Then we're able to see how this started back in the school system and back with parents and people who actually had the authority did not take it from the system. Our culture is not trust. We don't do with trust. We got trust issues right now about a vaccine. We know what it's like about anything else. But it comes through generations of this trust. When it gets to the school system, we're talking about now liability. Oh God, we don't want to be sued. I'm a retired educator. I can tell you, the school boards do not want to be sued. They don't want to just put somebody in there. We asked, and I'm going to go back to this again, where there's a curriculum to teach children how to tell on themselves. Now, the problem with that, you got some of the children come from households where this is happening. So now when parents hear about that, they say, what? Oh, no. Because see, their money would go out the door. Bobo is going to stop giving them money. Okay? And they don't want to know nothing, because then they're going to be held responsible for those kids being in that household. So it's all of that, and you can see the tangle web we weave.
Even the young boys.
Oh yeah.
Because there's a lot of there. Let's not negate. There are some women that are sexually assaulting or harassing young boys in these schools.
Yes,
the young boys don't look at it like that.
Definitely, and that's a whole nother dynamic too. Because they growing to be men. I have someone I know that she didn't know he had been sexually abused. He didn't know she had been sexually abused. But when they went on their honeymoon, she went in a virgin. No, he wasn't a sexually abused, but he was. But when they went in on their honeymoon, she went on her honeymoon as a virgin. She came home a virgin because he couldn't even go through it. You see? And so he had been in this type of thing the whole time, wedding and everything. And because nobody talks about it. But the bad thing is, once again, we talking about this domestic violence in the home. Most likely, there's also sexual abuse somewhere, or vice versa. It didn't happen just like that. It came with the process, whether it was during their childhood or whenever. Then you're talking about, like I said, so and so's paying all the bills. Billy's doing all of this and that. And then we had these kids home for how many months with these crazy people that couldn't. Oh Lord, now you talk about a mess. I kept thinking the whole time I was locked home was that these kids, and I'm retired now, but I was working a little for part-time with some second and third graders. I kept thinking about them and helping them with their reading. Are now home with these men that their mothers have taken up with, and mom might be working, but now definitely they both home. There's going to be some, he's mad because she's home or he's not working, and now we're talking about domestic violence, and then we're talking some way to get off steam. Well, when she's not home, then what's happening with these little boys and girls? So and police said they couldn't keep up with the numbers reported, and that's the report. That's not the not reported ones. Yeah. So we got a lot of work to do. So whatever can be done, I believe that it's my generation's responsibility, because your generation will speak out. Y'all will speak out. I love it. You'll tell on God. It don't matter. You'll tell them. But you speak out. And my generation does not. So those of us who can or will, and they talk to me now, but some of them not speaking out and telling you anything else, but they'll get behind too. And I noticed that more older women are getting behind me in this cause. But it's time, to make sure that we leave something here for you to work with, and to start it now while we can have a breath in our bodies, because we won't be here one day. And I hate to get somewhere, and excuse the piece here, but I want to hear well done. Okay, I want to hear that. All right.
Yeah, I think that even if we look at when we talk about curriculum, of course, I feel like a lot of people that are making the decisions on what should be curriculum are probably up there, and they're not necessarily the youth, right? So I think to change the curriculum on a base level, you would have to go through a lot of pipelines to where a lot of people would have to look themselves in the mirror and understand that what they were doing by technicality, by law, was wrong, and that alone is going to be a lot of pushback. We even see that on some of the laws, and even the domestic issues that we have that cops are coming out to, like even the young lady who recently went missing, and someone called and the cops came and they designated the fight that they were having as quote unquote a lover's quarrel, right? And then if you think about it on an individual level, if some people haven't heard about the story, the young lady ended up missing, and the gentleman came back home from the vacation. It's believed that she's passed, but when they encountered them, they categorized it as a lover's quarrel. So this may seem like a one-off incident, but then you realize the percentage of cops that are only caught in domestic issues that have been disciplined by their police department. That's right. And now we're just talking about grown-ups being held accountable. We're talking about cops being held accountable, and then you can see the disconnect between them having to enforce a law that they don't necessarily see as it being broken, because they're doing the same things. And this is at the highest level of reprimand.
There are states and cities that do not fire police officers for having sex with a detainee. Now, you and I get fired from our job. They get a slap on the wrist or suspension. And
and for me, like when you talk about domestic violence, and we know that a lot of people think domestic violence or this person just has anger issues, but really domestic violence is about power and control. Right? And so now we have power and control. We have a law enforcement officer who has power and control issues, who are exhibiting power and control issues at home, and then these same officers are going into the community and exhibiting that same power and control with our youth. I was actually on the Orange County Safety Task Force in Central Florida a couple months back. Yes. And when we talked, they wanted to talk about gang violence. And then what we saw in the gang violence, we said, well, wait a minute, who are the officers that keep arresting these youth? And so we started seeing a pattern based upon the officers' behavior, and then the youth can actually point out who's agitating some of the situations within our community. And what's worse, a lot of the victims from officers, they don't have any resources, because the officers is clicked in with the people at the clerk of the courts, clicked in with everybody, so they have no advocacy really afforded to them, which is an issue. I do want to identify everybody on here one more time. We have Bell. Oh, go ahead, Jay.
No, you can go ahead and identify everybody. I'll ask my question right after.
Okay, yes. We want to make sure we have Vel Johnson, publicist, communications extraordinaire. We have Ms. Tanika Poole from the executive director and founder of Bruised But Not Destroyed. And we also have Ms. Gail Gardner, who is an advocate and the catalyst for Gail's law and changing policies in the state of Florida. Make sure, Soapboxx Nation, that you follow the Soapboxx podcast. That's Soapboxx Podcast with 2X, as we are talking about domestic violence awareness, prevention, and advocacy for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, I don't know if you all already touched on this, but maybe we could talk a little bit about how emotional abuse is sometimes left out of that domestic violence category. And women, sometimes there's so many situations where, I hate to just say women, but I can't really speak on behalf of men. In general, any person that's in a relationship where they choose to not speak their truth because there is a stigma around being weak, as far as how when you grow up and they say sticks and stones don't break my bones and things like that. And so sometimes when we hear emotional abuse, we think that category is not as hindering as being a punching bag.
Physical abuse.
It's the truth. A lot of women, like the women that I help with my program, a lot of them didn't even realize they were part of an abusive relationship because it may not have been physical. Even in my second marriage, I didn't see it at the time as abuse, because I'm like, well, he's not putting his hands on me. Yeah, he's a narcissist. Yes, he's cheating on me every chance he gets. He's making me think I done lost my mind, even though I just saw him get out that car, but he making me think that I'm crazy. That's abuse. But because it wasn't physical, I didn't see it as abuse until after I got out of the situation and healed. And I was like, he had my mind just completely gone. That's abuse. A lot of people don't see it as abuse because you're not physically being hurt. But in all honesty, I would have preferred maybe you put your hands on me, because those will heal. But the things that you've done to me mentally, that is lasting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we had an advocate on a few, I think last year. Her name was Jan Edwards. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Jan, and she talked about the concept of the Romeo pimp, right? And decided basically victims have how they romanticize, and talked a lot about Stockholm syndrome. And I also read about that victims have to leave about 7 times before they actually decide to leave. And when they do leave, and then when they do get ready to leave, actually how dangerous it is to leave. And I know you could speak on that, Tanika, and also Ms. Gail as well, because there is, and even Vel, when you were talking about making sure, the event of itself is secure and is a safe space. Can you touch on that for anyone who's watching that says, well, why don't you just leave? Because we get a lot of those folks. You hear that, right? You hear, well, why don't you just leave right away? If someone's doing that to you, I would just leave. I would just go to the cops. Can you explain or expound as to why that is not as easy as it seems, or why it's so dangerous?
And I'm sorry, TJ, and within that question as well, if you all would kind of expand on what are some of the things that people should look out for early that possibly they should be leaving, because a lot of times I do feel like there are little signs and red flags that don't seem like a lot, but they're slowly accumulating, and then you get into a point where it's like a point of no return. So yeah, just to kind of piggyback off his question.
One of the things I'm looking at, I'm thinking of something I had mentioned that came to mind just then with that question, is the fact that what was wrong with us to get into that relationship? What were we needing? What were we missing? When you go to counseling, you don't go into marriage counseling with your abuser. You go to one and he goes to another. And if he gets healed, that's fine, but you don't go back into that. You should come out of that, where you come out of your counseling, you're thinking much better about who you are, and you don't even want anything to do with that. But mostly is, where am I psychologically? This is like Giovanni said, what is the, how are we, how, that emotional part of us is affected very much so. That's the scar that's really left. I had a scar on my face from the knife that was put on my face that went away. You can't even tell it, but the scar that it left to my emotional and mental health and well-being is still a battle. So a life sentence for one person being physically incarcerated and one person being mentally incarcerated is two different things. So when you go into another relationship and you go with that kind of a mindset that you're having struggles as it is in your own, and you think someone else is going to help you to, your better half, if we use that line, is that somebody that's going to help pull you out of where you are, and they're going to be that person that for you. That's not true. That's a fallacy, altogether.
For me, when I wrote my book, it was like therapy. And I found out a lot of things about myself and why I stayed. First of all, I went into these relationships and I wasn't whole. I was a broken person, very broken, and I was searching for them to fill the void that I had. So because of what I went through in my childhood, I already felt like, okay, well, my mother chose this man over me. So I felt like, my mother left me. Even though she was still there, I felt like she left me because she chose this man over me. She didn't protect me. She chose him over me. And then, my mom and dad were divorced. And I felt like, okay, now my dad chose, his new wife over me. And in my head, I have this man, even though he's not perfect, I felt like he's going through all this and he's fighting, he's staying. I'm like, at least he's fighting to be with me. So it felt like when everybody else left me, it felt like, well, he's fighting so hard because he loved me. And because I didn't love myself and I felt like I had that void, it was something. Well, at least it's some sort of love. Yeah. Something is better than nothing.
Yeah. Somebody told us that. Yeah.
TJ, you mentioned earlier, you were asking, where does it start? How can you identify before it gets to that point where you're getting physically abused? Yes. I know during our event, we're going to be covering a topic related also, which is bullying. And, I think whether it's the man or the woman, if they start to feel like they're being bullied in the relationship, and Giovanni, I think you mentioned emotional abuse. That's basically that same thing, that taunting, not touching yet, not hitting yet, but it starts with crude jokes, criticizing, or maybe the relationship started off being very warm and loving and complimentary, romantic. It just kind of gradually eases into a different tone. The attitude just starts to change, and gradually, before you know it, it's more of, and there's a great emotional impact and harm, and that can gradually lead into even more. But I think that could possibly be one of the signs that eventually you're going to end up into a relationship that's something that needs to be paid attention to.
And control, don't forget that.
Control, very much so.
If you think someone, he's doing this because he loves me. And I know it may seem very cute and very loving to a lot of women. He wants to know where I am all the time. Where were you? I called you, you weren't home. I called you 3 times. Why didn't you pick up the phone? wanting to check your phone, wanting to know where you went, wanting to know the address to where you are. Like that kind of stuff, that's beyond, that's not normal. That is like, that's not normal.
And they may say, oh, it's just because I care. You know, they use that as the excuse, but no, that's not love.
No.
As we say, love doesn't hurt. You know, love doesn't hurt emotionally or physically. And
I had an OG tell me one time, you have to love people, you have to love a woman in a way that she feels free. And I didn't get that when I was younger. So there was after, you know, a lot of maturation. And I think a lot of times, and I've said this on the podcast before, a lot of times the boys that we are, you know, when we were in our adolescence, like through our maturation process, we leave a lot of women who are casualty of emotional pain, casualty of physical pain, you know, in order for us to become the men who we are. And so, you know, I think for men, we have to get into a space where we are identify not only what's going on in our pathway, but also our triggers. And I think we mentioned about healing and, you know, destigmatizing mental health. I think a lot of times we have to, you know, really take a step back. And, you know, if there's a relationship, like there are unhealthy relationships, like it doesn't need to get to, you know, that point where you talk about, you know, you didn't know yourself, or, you know, so we're talking about self-worth. Sometimes you got to pull, and I'm talking to the fellas out there that listen more so than to the people on the podcast. It's like, sometimes you got to take yourself out of the situation and say, you know what, I am not in a good space mentally or physically. But I think a lot of men don't identify their abandonment issues. So it's better to just have somebody just there. You see what I'm saying? And they become the punching bag for lack of a better term, you know, because of their internal struggles, which is extremely unfair. So for the fellas that are actually going through that, it's, you know, you have to yourself man up and do the work. And I think more as we have more advocacy, more talking about things like this on platforms, more people will be more apt to do the work. Alan, do you have something?
I have something.
Oh, go ahead, Jay.
And even this isn't necessarily just pertain to domestic violence, but since you were talking about men owning up and doing the work, I kind of feel like there's a part of women that also women who have sons have to help them do the work. And I think that there's a disconnect sometimes when we raise our sons, if we are already, or if we're coming out of a relationship, or if we just had a child and we experience trauma in our past. Sometimes when we have sons, like we teach them to be this super tough human being and this hard person. And even if it's not necessarily physical domestic violence, there are a lot of men who just do not understand the concept of love at all, or do not understand the concept of being able to treat another human being like a human being, because they don't love themselves. And I think that the root may not necessarily be the mom, but it just can be the lessons in how we treat our sons if they fall and scrape their knee, or if my son sees me in an altercation with another woman and how I treat that woman, or if I'm going at it with the daddy and we're both fighting and my son sees that, then he may think that's how life is. You fight your lady, you know, and then when they grow up, sometimes they just never get rid of some of those things. But I feel like from personal stories that I know, it is always like what happened prior. And I'm not saying that people don't develop these things on their own, but a lot of it is rooted in growing up as a child and what they see in the household, or X, Y, and Z. Now, when it comes to like staying, I can't really I feel like I can speak to some of those things, but everybody's situation is different. But I do know that it is hard to leave situations where you feel like your truth is not really real, and that sometimes you just I forgot what they call it, but
Gaslighting.
You could say it, part of it is gaslighting. Well, I feel like the gaslighting may be on the other person, but I mean, I'm talking about yourself you don't believe yourself. Or you're finding an excuse to think like, well, they did it because of this reason, or I'm tripping. It's not that big of a deal. At least my arm isn't broken, opposed to, it's just a butt slip. Or he just told me that I was stupid and called me 3 curse words, but tomorrow it'll be better.
Yeah.
Things like that we just kind of negate.
I think that has a lot to do with the psyche. A lot of individuals have poor self-esteem, and that's going to show through the relationship in more than one way. Unfortunately.
I wanted to talk. I know we're talking about, we talked about children and we talked about discipline. Like, I want to go around. Like, are we? Because as a parent, I'm currently not a parent yet, but there's still this debate of whether or not we should discipline our kids. Should we beat our kids? Should we use that same core? Do you guys have an opinion on that, Tanika, Ms. Gail, Val? Are we like, what are we? Because I've got some legendary.
I need answers.
There's a difference between discipline and abuse. There's a difference. Now, disciplining your child or spanking your child because they've done something wrong, I don't see anything wrong with that. But when it gets to the point where you're breaking their nose, you're knocking teeth out, they have busted lips, they have busted nose, you're whooping them with extension cords, and they have open wounds and have to be hospitalized, you're choking them out. That's not whooping your kids. No. That's beating your children. There's a difference. So yes, I do believe that a big problem with the children these days is a lack of discipline. Yes, I think children still do need to be disciplined, but do they need to be abused? No.
I have I heard something the other night that Oprah Winfrey, somebody mentioned Oprah Winfrey somebody told her that the longest walk there is go get your own switch. And so
I had to go get my own switch.
And if it wasn't the right size, you had to go back and get another switch.
I would break it in little pieces all the way.
Yeah.
To go back and get another one. I remember those days.
And you with the extension cord. My generation, that was norm. And it had gotten to the place where somebody had to say, wait a minute. And I wish they'd have said it when I was growing up, but they waited till my kids was growing up, and then they made a law that it was abuse, But I didn't do that to my kids. We didn't go that far. But now they got they got corporal punishment, but it wasn't abusive. So
and another thing,
I don't think it was abusive. They might tell you another story, but they're adults now, got their own children. One of them was a grandmother, so they can't tell me anything. They still here and they lived through it. How about that?
Go ahead, Jay.
So another thing for you all in general to speak personally to, when a person, or from your personal experience, when you got out of the situation, or not even got out of the situation, but when was it, or how did you feel when you knew I can move on and I can have a normal life despite the things that I've gone through? And what, was it just like you woke up one morning and it was like a spiritual awakening, or what was that process like?
I got to the point where I literally I didn't get committed or anything, but I think I had a mental breakdown. Like, I literally think I had a mental breakdown. I was at work and I was on the phone with the customer. I was in sales at the time. And because I had been built because of so much abuse over the years, like, that's why the book is No More Secrets of Truth Behind Our Smile. I had learned to just bury everything, never, really address it, and just smile, pretend like nothing happened, keep moving. What goes in your house stays in your house. Just push it down. Don't deal with it. Don't address it. But after so long, you put so much stuff down, there's nowhere else for it to go except for it to explode. So I'm on the phone with the customer and I literally just start crying hysterically. And I couldn't stop. I am sobbing. I am crying in the middle of the call center, crying on the phone with a customer. They take me into the managers to take over the phone call. They take me into the room and they're like, what's going on? And I'm like, I can't do this. And they're like, okay, it's okay. You don't have to work today. You can go home. You can take a day to, I'm like, no, I can't do this. And they're like, Okay, you can't do it, go home. I'm like, no, you don't understand. I can't do life anymore. I don't want to be here. I'm done. I give up. It's too much. I'm done. I don't want to do life anymore. And it was at that point, it's crying, and I realized that I had to address everything that I dealt with and had to heal. And I heard someone say, pain produce your purpose. And I stick with that now.
That's it.
I'm like, God, why? God, why? God, why? God, why? Yes, I went through a lot of pain, but he allowed me to go through all that pain and get through it and overcome it so that I can help someone else get through it or avoid it altogether. My pain produced my purpose, and that what led me to go into this, because you may have been bruised, but you are not destroyed. You can come out stronger than you were before. And then it's your job to reach back and help somebody else too.
That's right.
There is healing in our testimony. There is healing in our transparency.
That's right.
So
That's powerful. That's powerful. Indeed.
You know, just something that I was thinking about, you know, when you all were talking about power, like I do wonder if just the way that society is set up in regards to essentially men almost being tied to their worth by how much power they have, um, on a professional level, and from young being, you know, essentially being ingrained in us that we are being providers and you have to do XYZ to be a provider. And I don't think that we're necessarily ever taught to compartmentalize that behavior. So we kind of, I feel like a lot of people are just byproducts of trying to be the most powerful, and in turn end up being manipulating and just terrible people, because that peak or that quote unquote mountaintop of manhood is tied to a lot of people's success. And I'm wondering how much of that just filters down to, you know, men being perpetrators of especially emotional domestic violence, right? Even if they've never taken it physically, but you know, the attitude towards their partners, and of course everyone else around them, but especially their partners, because when you go home, that's who you really are, and the person that you're laying next to is going to get the grunt of the bear of, you know, your lowest moments. And so, you know, I just wanted to get your perspective on that. Do you think that the way that society is set up and how we teach young boys what their worth is tied to plays a part in to a lot of emotional manipulation that men do dish out, whether it be on purpose or, you know, consciously or subconsciously?
I think the way people are raised altogether, whether it be men or women, we are, even though we can make changes, we are a product of how we were nurtured. So even if we don't intentionally do things, you'll notice that you have traits from either what you did have in your life or lack thereof.
That's right.
So it has a lot to do with it.
That's what they call a psychosocial, that environment that you grew up in, the things that you learned just by the people in your circle. Had a huge play on it. And some of those things would work good things, some of the things may not have been good. And then how you process it. And between the ages of 0 to 7, you soak up everything. It becomes concrete to you by the time you're 8 years old, 9 years. Some things it's going to take another level of work to change it. It's been done between 0 and 7 years old. That's there. So that's why we have to be so careful of what our children learn in the household and then when they start school. But it goes a long way as to who you are, and it's part of that will in you that when we talk about spirit, soul, and body, and you talk about that soul of you, that will in you, where your personality is built. And changing that personality is not easy after you get to a certain age, but then you need the help. Unfortunately, we as a culture don't go any further than that. And then we seal it by saying, well, that's just the way I am, as though we can't learn anything else. and or things can't change. Your mind can't be renewed, or or we can't be changed in any way. But that's not true. That's only because we will it not be so.
Exactly.
All you gotta do is will it to be so, and it'll change.
Yeah.
You how you think is who you are.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to that question, just so we could hear from Gail as well, just the moment where she felt like she had the strength to kind of get back to herself and take a stand up against the things that she went through. What was that moment like? How did you know that you were in a better place, or that you needed to find your, or I don't even know what you call it, but just that moment that you had?
You mean after I found out about the case or before then?
Before, just in general, for you to say, I know that this happened to me, but I am not going to allow it to take my life.
With me, it was a community. I was in a church community, and it was a safe place, safe space for me. Not so much as not all the people, because they didn't understand. My generation didn't understand none of this. They had some things to say and say, you knew the man. And then I had told them about, my childhood, thinking they would be empathetic. Well, see, you got to understand, my generation had gone through the same thing. They didn't want nobody talking about it. And they sure don't want you to ask them any questions. But at the time, in my innocence. But at some point, I had to keep moving to that space that I had, that I felt safe. And couldn't afford mental health counseling. I couldn't afford. I did that for a couple of times, but I couldn't afford that $50. I was a single parent with a 9-year-old who's now 43, and so I just did not have the money. And so I was, everybody wasn't talking that, but I was talking that. I wanted to see somebody. I needed some help. I didn't care what color they were. I didn't care what they believed. It didn't make no difference. I need some help, and but I couldn't afford it, so I had to depend on what I had available to me. And so I just kept moving. Get this, my childhood came up with nobody would believe me. So I kept what was going on with my stepfather in my house growing up. It wasn't until I was 42 when the counselor I saw said, you need to say something to your mother. And that's when I said something. All this at that time, I had aspirations of what I wanted to do with my life, but I was completely told that I could not, that I wasn't anybody. By 17, I had 2 children. The promiscuity kicked in, all of that, PTSD, all of that became all of that. I was a girl growing up in the South Bronx, and recreational, getting high. You understand? That was my life, but I still had aspirations. I wanted better. And I didn't graduate from high school. I wound up getting a GED, but I wound up teaching high school years later, master's degrees, and took care of the mother that I felt like didn't protect me. So what I'm saying is, you got to have some kind of aspiration, some kind of will, a will to live, not just physically, but a will to live mentally, to be whole, and to have something in life other than just. And the more you tell me I can't see, I try to prove you wrong one way or the other. Yeah. But it's but you got to have that fight in you. So being the Bronx girl I am,
yeah,
I still had. That's what I'm saying. I can be here, and I got there's something part of me that I guess will never lose. I turned that fight around. And so I have to fight my way. I had to fight my way through. And that's when I decided one day. I was walking down, it was after the rape, and I was walking down from the back office of the church. I was working for the church at the time, and walked up the aisle, going upstairs, going to the back to the lobby, where there's a staircase that leads up to the balcony where my office was. And I remember stopping in the middle of the balcony, in the middle of the aisle, and just looked up to God. I don't know what it is, but I need some help. I need some help. I don't know where it's coming from, and I started to cry. I said, I need some help. I was 42, I remember. So what I'm saying is, you got to have a fight in you. You got to have an aspiration. You can't just lay down and die. And you need somebody to help you through it. that was that was where where I got my strength from. But everyone gets there from somewhere else or from someone else, someone to talk to. I didn't have anyone to talk to, so now I listen to everybody. I'm sitting in the airport last week in DC. No, I was in Atlanta going to DC. And I'm listening to this and I'm talking to this young lady. I'm talking about Hill's Law, and she just tells me about, she was molested by an aunt growing up, and I get those all the time. So your purpose, through your pain, baby. Through your pain, you will find your purpose if you're determined not to lay down and take this laying down, just to fight your way. So I'm depending. This is my last word now. I'm looking for you guys. I tell people to vote if they over 50. Don't vote for them.
I've been saying that. I've been saying that. That's rough.
Don't vote for them if they over 50, baby. So don't worry about it. They think just like their former daddies, and the slave owners. That generational thing just don't follow them right on. If they got gray hair and white headed and over 50, don't vote for them. Maybe 60. Maybe they can go 60. But the whole idea is just being able to leave that fight. It's so someone else will fight, and you guys do great with your age group and and beyond. Even the millennials, I talk about them real bad, but they all right. They still old, because they think they're entitled. But nonetheless, you keep that fight going, and make the difference, and don't be afraid to speak out. Speak up. Yeah. Stay on the platforms that you have and speak. And what's necessary in order to make the difference.
You're just in the
other people's lives, be a thriver.
Yeah, well, I wanted to, and I'd be remiss. And again, thank y'all for coming on the show and speaking your truth. But I would be remiss if I didn't end. Well, before we go to the moral of the story, and we'll explain what the moral of the story is a little later. But I would be remiss if I didn't ask, from Val to Tanika to Ms. Gail, what would you say to someone who's maybe watching this and maybe listening to this podcast, who is going through this, who is hesitant of, whether or not they should get out, or whether or not, this is actually happening to, or whether they're victims of sexual assault or domestic violence? I know you touched on it, throughout the podcast briefly, but I'm going to do a single shot, and I would just like you to speak to someone who is a victim or someone who is going through this, if you could, and just if you could, what would your message to them be? I'm gonna start with you, Tanika.
My message to them will be: you are not alone. You have more support than you think. Do not be ashamed of what you're going through. It is not your fault. Reach out for help. Yeah. Love does not hurt.
Absolutely. And Ms. Val.
Absolutely. Over the last few weeks, I have met a lot of ladies who have shared their stories with me. And that's because we're in the middle of this campaign for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And one thing that I've said to them is that if they were to look at where they are now, and if they think about the future, say a year from now, if they can see themselves in the same place a year from now, and most of them say they can't. They say if a year from now, if things continue, they'll probably be dead or something. I said, think about that. Think about your loved ones. Think about your children, if you have children. Think about those that care about you. What is it that they would ask, that they would want you to do? They would want you to get out of that situation. I think the key is that we start loving ourselves more than those around us. Sometimes we are so self-sacrificing that we put ourselves in the back burner and we just sit back and do nothing. But I would say you just have to take that leap of faith. You have to for your children's sake. If not, it's all in vain what you're doing now. You just have to do it. You've got to step out and realize that you're not alone. You're not alone. And when you get out there'll be other people that can take your hand.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that. And Ms. Gail, what would you say to someone who's going through maybe a situation of sexual assault, some uncertainty, or if they're in a domestic violence situation?
I would say that um, it would be remiss of me not to pull them into a place where they need to learn more about who they are. Once you begin to learn who you are, you begin to see yourself differently. That means you might have to depend on a counseling session. There are free counselors. There are free mental health counselors. There are pastoral counselors. There are people who will listen to your story and help you to see another perspective. Good counseling does not tell you what to do. It helps you see another perspective. They take that, what they want to tell you to do, and turn it in a way for you to see, and the light comes on. And then you go to have that aha moment. So that's what I say to them is to find someone who can listen, who will listen to you. I like to think that everyone can write a story, and they can on my website they can do that, even a blog, something they want to turn in, just to get it out. So whatever way you can express yourself and what you're feeling, journaling. I love journals. I got so many journals, and I constantly journals are healing. Writing is cathartic, and so it is going to help you to express what you really are feeling. And when times when you can't talk to someone, tears are very good and healthy to have. Don't try to hold them back when you need to, and then get up. I think I'll talk to someone. I think I'll get some help. I think maybe I'll consider some other ways of changing my life. But until you can do that, somebody that's going to help you to see who you really are, help you to express that you're not here by accident and that you are loved, and you need that. You need that. So you, especially if you have family members, if you have children, you need to be able to give them something to hope for. You owe it to them.
Absolutely. And Alan, you had a quick question before we go to the moral of the story, and I'm gonna start moral of the story with you, Giovanni, so you can show us all how it's done. But Alan, go ahead with your quick question.
Yes. So a common theme which you ladies have expressed is after you told your story that a lot of people came and opened up to you because, as you all stated, you are not alone. But personally, as women who have carried the burden of their own trauma, once you open that door and people feel comfortable to lay their trauma on you, mentally, how do you handle the weight of what other people are unloading on you as well? Like, do you take that home? How do you compartmentalize it? Because I can imagine that, like I said, dealing with your own self and your own trauma and demons is work, but also dealing with other people, maybe not even on a regular basis. It could just be a story that someone told you in passing, but I'm sure that has an ability to affect your day. How do you find time, and what do you do to make sure that you're not overwhelmed by other people's stories while also dealing with yours as well?
I pray for them and for myself. Number one. Number two, I look for self-care things to do. Got to have self-care. If I can't get away on a plane, then let me go spend the day. Um, I think Belle and I not too long ago spent a day with some friends, and I had some other friends that I can introduce them to, and it gets a beautiful, day, doing something different out of that environment. And I also time I love to write, and I'm a reader. So between those things of relaxing and then getting on a plane if I have to go into maybe a short weekend or whatever, just get out of the environment. But you have to set boundaries too, and you can't become someone's crutch. You got to know when to hold them, when to fold them, and keep it moving. Otherwise, you'll get stuck there in that place.
Mine is vacationing. My husband, I think I drive him crazy with it, but he understands now. I deal with a lot of women, and then with having the transitional homes, and literally there are times where my phone is ringing all day long, both phone lines and emails. So I vacation once a month.
Yes.
Once a month, we get on the plane and we're going somewhere.
Yeah.
I got a vacation once a month. Have to.
Good for you.
Otherwise,
good.
I will go crazy.
That's right. I'm waiting to do that and grow up just be like you.
We want to be like you when we grow up, right? I think it's important that we find a way where we can decompress mentally, you know, because even if you haven't gone through a situation like what we're discussing, just sometimes a mountain of cares and worries of the world that you're dealing with, and then someone else comes along with their cares and worries and they try to add it to you, it can just be overwhelming if you're not careful.
That's right.
And so for me, it's important that I just sometimes just don't tell anyone anything and just may throw a few things in a bag and drive, you know, get away. I love the ocean. I love the beach. For me, if I can just spend a couple of hours walking along the shoreline, meditating, you know, just focusing inward, and trying not to think about any worries, just thinking about how grateful I am for all the blessings that I have, that helps me a lot to just focus on the good and positive things. And then once I get centered, you know, after a few hours or maybe even a couple of days, then I go back and I can deal with everyone else's problems.
Yeah. This has been an insightful and powerful podcast episode. I really appreciate everyone's time. We have a recurring segment on our show called The Moral of the Story. Basically, this is our way of kind of putting a nice little bow on the entire conversation. It's an opportunity for our guests to plug where our audience, Soapboxx Nation, can find you, and if there is any way that they can help you with your advocacy or any organizations or even any events that you're going to be a part of. So I'm going to send it over to Giovanni. She's going to show us how it's done, and then we're going to go around the horn. Giovanni, what is your moral of the story?
Yeah, my moral of the story for today is your pain serves a purpose. And I'm also a fond believer of that. When whatever that pain is, however you classify it, I think one thing that you have to realize is that it doesn't matter how you drown, if you drown. You know, it doesn't matter how deep your water was or whatever that looks like. You still can be used in a lot of different ways. And so, yes, pain serves a purpose. I'm a firm believer on the self-care and the self-love. You all definitely know that. So make sure that you follow me at Just Giovanni on Instagram and on Facebook. Of course, I'm trying to drop all the motivational things that I can as much as possible. But yeah, your purpose definitely, pain definitely serves a purpose.
Thank you. Appreciate you, Giovanni. Miss Tanika, we're going to start with you. We're going to throw it to you. Thank you so much for being on the Soapboxx podcast. Oliver Gazelle, Ms. Tanika, Ms. Gail, you are all welcome back on the Soapboxx podcast. Please don't ever be a stranger. Y'all are part of our ongoing family as well. Ms. Tanika, Ms. Tanika Poole, what is your moral of the story?
So the moral of the story is make sure, whether it's man or woman, I need you to make sure that you are loving yourself, because when you love yourself and you truly know who you are, you will not accept things that you would not have accepted, that you would have accepted if you didn't love yourself. So make sure you are whole, you are healed before going into these relationships, because remember, we attract what we haven't healed from. You can find me on Instagram at Nika Latrice 79. You can also find me on Instagram at Bruised But Not Destroyed, and on Facebook at Bruised But Not Destroyed as well.
Absolutely. Thank you again. Miss Vel Johnson, communication extraordinaire. What is your moral of the story? And please make sure you plug the event that is happening next week, I believe, correct?
Absolutely. It's October 30th. It's a Saturday, so it's convenient for many of us who may work Monday through Friday. It's going to start at 12:30 with a lunch, and then we're going to proceed into the meeting space right at 1 o'clock. So for just maybe a little over 2 solid hours, we're anticipating an opportunity to have an intimate gathering of survivors and friends where we share. We provide resources that we have for each other, mental health resources, educational tools. There will be door prizes. We hope to mix it up and have a little fun as well. So it's not going to be completely seriousness, but it will be an opportunity that I feel that everyone will walk away from being glad that they came. I always say, if you always do what you've always done, then you're always going to get what you've always had. And if you want anything different, then you've got to step out on a limb. I am a public relations consultant, and I work with organizations that are trying to do things differently. I work with organizations that are rebranding, or they may be starting from scratch. You can reach me at Visage Communications, and my website address is www.visagecommunications.com, and that's Visage with a V, VASAJ, communications.com. You can reach me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, at Visage Communications. And you can email me at vel@visagecommunications.com if you want to send me a personal note.
All right. Appreciate that. Mr. Allen York, what is your moral of the story, sir?
Hey, my moral, well, first off, of course, like everyone echoed, ladies, thank you so much for coming on the pod and sharing your wisdom. We appreciate it, as well as the continued work that you do in the community. My moral of the story for today is, as echoed earlier, you are not alone. You never know what person or what people right in your proximity, or maybe not in your proximity, are going through the same things that you're going through and would love to open up, but they're just looking for someone else to open up to. So, you are not alone. Don't ever think that your situation is isolated. There's nothing new under the sun. So don't be afraid to speak up. Love yourself and also decompress.
Absolutely.
Love that. Thank you.
Miss Gail Gardner, what is your moral of the story?
My moral of the story is you gotta keep moving. Trauma will put you in a place what they call stuckness. You'll get stuck right there. And the whole idea is to push past that, keep moving forward to what you have, what the plan is for your life. Know that you're not alone. I love what Tamika says, that bruised but not destroyed. It's not the end of life. My website is www.stillthekingsdaughter.com. The title comes from the story of Tamar, who was raped by her brother and went into a life of obscurity. But we don't have to say that was that culture. This culture says, come out of there, begin to talk and show yourself strong, and know that you are not alone. Like Tarana Burke says, to meet generation. So it's a time for us to get beyond where we are. And if you need to go into my website, you may, and you can also email me at Gail F. as in Francis Gardner, Gail F. Gardner, all one word, at gmail.com, or info@stillthekingsdaughter.com.
All right, thank you. And in my moral of the story, really, I listened to this podcast. It was very hard for me to not get emotional. My lady, my partner, is a rape victims advocate. Mm-hmm. And so I get to see, and she works remotely at times, and I get to see firsthand of all the calls and the emotional toll. And, I really thought about her on throughout this podcast. I'd like to dedicate this podcast to her because we had a really trying and personal week. A lot of stuff going on, and just the incredible strength that it takes to do that work, to advocate for women and victims. But the title of this podcast is "You Are Not Alone," and I'm hoping that if she's watching, and I believe she is, that she understands that she's not alone in the strength that she has. That there are so many other powerful women that are advocates, that are working towards giving voices to the voiceless, and empowering them to have self-worth and work and self-care, and to do more for themselves, to take control of their own lives where someone has tried to subjugate them or oppress them. So for me, this podcast has really reinforced my gratitude for her and her strength, and also for you women that are on the podcast as well. And I would just say this again, that we on the Soapboxx, we're committed to domestic violence awareness, mental health awareness, not just in the respective months that are designated to these things, but throughout the year. So again, you're all welcome back to the Soapboxx podcast. We definitely appreciate each and every one of you, for all the advocates who work tirelessly, thankless hours, who talk to, countless victims and have to hear about rape, sexual assault, violence, and still get up and do what you need to do for yourselves and for your partners. There's a tremendous amount of gratitude that I have right now in my heart for the work that you do. As an activist myself who work in the social justice space, I understand the toll that it takes, and sometimes you do need to step away. But you are needed, you're not alone, and you most certainly are greatly appreciated. So I wanted to say thank you, not just to Eileen, or who I call affectionately she who remains. I appreciate her, and I appreciate each and every one of you for being on the podcast tonight. All right. So let me see if I can do this. Usually I have to, so for Alan York, for Vel, for Miss Gail Gardner, for Miss Tamika Poole, for Jess Giovanni, and for Jesse, who had to tend to the newborn and her strength as a mother. It's all good. We are the Soapboxx podcast. Ladies, this is where we pose and we do a little, peace sign or something. We are the Soapboxx podcast. Domestic violence awareness for more than just a month. We are out. Peace.
Tell them what we talking about.